Hi besties, and welcome back to Tiffing Through Time with your host Tiffany V. That's me! In today's episode, I will be taking you through memory lane to when I traveled to Malacca, Malaysia, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. One of the places I had always wanted to visit due to its rich mix of colonial history, multicultural influences, and vibrant street life. Why would we even care about your travel experience anyway? It'll be boring, you may ask. Besties, it is because heritage is not just something you find in curated museums. It is also something that we all consume unconsciously daily. It is part of the life as we know it. But instead of just giving you a travelogue, which would be too boring and too predictable, I will add visual aids instead of just my voice as I usually do. Hopefully this would not be too jarring for some of you. Most importantly, I want to use this experience to reflect on a bigger question. What does it mean to consume heritage? That was the question that popped into my head when I walked through Malacca's historically rich streets. I came to a realization that I was not just looking at old buildings that are decades or older or eating delicious local food. I was consuming stories, identities, and even past itself. So in today's Tiffing Through Time, I'll be trying to answer two guided questions. Number one, how do you see the roles of consumption in your day-to-day existence? Number two, how does the academic study of consumption help you to understand the roles of consumption in your life? The first thing that popped into my head when I hear the word consumption are shopping, eating, or streaming. However, consumption in Malacca appeared different. State House, for example, is the popular bright Dutch colonial structure in the city center. A gorgeous city, by the way. I was not only looking at architecture standing in front of it, with rickshaws playing music and Hello Kitty decoration all over it. I was consuming stories of the past about colonial legacy, presented in the photogenic and marketable package made for social media virality. And at A Famosa, which are the ruins of the Portuguese fort, I found myself doing the same thing, consuming histories in small curated bits. These instances reminds me of the writings of Nelson Gaburn. He claims that heritage is frequently produced into consumable items where traditions and histories are made into products. That was a big surprise to me, as when I went to the Baba Nyonya Heritage Museum, I did not get the impressions of Samuel's old house, but of a well-organized stage performance. My ticket was not merely a ticket to visit the Peranakan, but to buy an authentic experience of the Peranakan. And of course, like many tourists, I too bought home souvenirs. Gazin Swats discusses the way tourists gather past souvenirs. I did just that when I purchased a small keychain that was in the shape of the Christ Church. It may seem like an insignificant item, but to me personally, it symbolizes a far more significant concept. I was literally taking a piece of curated heritage and a physical manifestation of my memories in Malacca home with me. But I ensured to get souvenirs that were handmade by local artists to support what I assume is their livelihood as well as to keep the arts alive. Therefore, I could already understand that consumption is not only about purchasing items, but about how we perceive or take in experiences, narratives, and identities, and then carry them with us for the rest of our lives. The Jonker Street Night Market was one of the busiest and most crowded locations that I have had the pleasure of visiting in Malacca. There was a variety of food, music blasting, antiques, and a crowd of people. The sweetness of the apple tarts blended with the aroma of grilled satay smoked at Jonker Street. With my hands full of snacks, I vividly recall maneuvering the crowds and discovering that even my taste bud had taken part in this heritage consumption. It felt alive, yet as I mentioned before, curated to the theme regardless. Cultures and traditional art pieces such as the Peranakan culture reduced to mere trinkets, food, or decorative packaging. That brought me back to Ashworth, who stated that selective interpretation is always included in such heritage. Some of the stories become highlighted while some are forgotten. I saw this in Malacca, happening in front of my own eyes. Colonial architect was at the center of the attention. More mundane histories of local people were more difficult to discern without any prior guidance from tour guides or literature. Warwick Frost also describes how heritage tourism intertwines with local identity and global consumption. I saw that instance happening in Malacca as well. Eating quinoa was not merely about eating good food or the taste, but it was presented as a form of history, a way for tourists to literally taste and immerse themselves in historic cuisine. And then I understood the food stalls, the souvenirs, even the museum tours. They were not only about preservation, they were a part of a mechanism that commoditized heritage. All of this did make me wonder what kind of consumer was I being. I had a feeling that I was an active consumer at times. I would be reflecting on the ways local traditions and colonial power had come together at St. Paul's Church as I examined its remnants. I discovered that some people use it as a background for Instagram, while it reminded me of my school history classes. At other times, however, I was more passive. While browsing browsing souvenir shops, I pick up trinkets without really considering what they represent. All I did was enabling colors and novelty reel me in. The notion of active audience, which maintains that people generally interpret, reject, or formulate new meanings, in addition to accepting what is represented to them, struck me when I thought about this conflict. In Malacca, I was periodically critical and sometimes subservient, but at least I acknowledged these changes unlike others. Once I start having all the previous thoughts, they develop into more questions and curiosity, hence turning into observation. I start noticing how other tourists around me are consuming Malacca. The colonial buildings appeared to captivate foreign visitors, who took countless pictures of the State House. In contrast, local Malaysian tourists frequently visited the sites as part of a national narrative, sometimes even as part of a family heritage trip. This distinction brought to my McGibbon's research on ski sightseeing in the Alps, which observes that various communities, depending on their class or culture, use the same location in quite different ways. Some saw skiing as a luxurious activity, while others saw it as an opportunity for adventure or camaraderie. I observed a similar split within Malacca. For tourists from all around the world, the city represented exotic culture. Malaysians took pride in their multicultural heritage. As someone from Sarawak, Malaysia, who is not from Malacca, my consumption was somewhere in between, half touristic and half familiar. That made me realize that consumption varies. How we relate to the location and who we are all influences this. As I strolled through Malacca, I couldn't help but wonder, is this sustainable? In the opinions of Shang, Chan, Law and Shang, heritage tourism needs to strike a balance between preservation and consumption. Cultural identities can be compromised by excessive commercializations. This tension was apparent everywhere. On the other hand, tourism contributes to the preservation of Malacca's museum and lively streets. However, I began to question whether the authenticity of heritage was being diminished owing to the abundance of souvenir shops and Instagram-worthy experiences. This problem has been addressed by Valentina, Suraguyo, Logan, and Christie, whose work highlights how heritage consumption may rapidly transform into spectacles. The term spectacles truly resonates with me because at times, it seems like heritage was being performed for an audience as opposed to being preserved for those living on Joker Street. All of this drove me to contemplate what my consumption in Malacca said about me. I positioned myself as a heritage tourist by opting to visit, purchasing tickets and mementos, and sharing my experiences on social media. Someone who both appreciates and consumes history. Heritage is always about balancing what is traditional and what is newly established, as Gabern reminds us. My choice to travel to Malacca was, in a sense, influenced by that discussion. I contributed to the continuous creation of heritage itself by participating in these carefully planned events. Therefore, consumption is not only external, it additionally impacts how I view myself and how other people may perceive me. After returning from the trip, I began to recognize some important lessons. First, consumption is far more prevalent than I initially believed. It extends beyond simply purchasing food and trinkets. It has to do with how we interact with identities, histories, and experiences. Second, I acquired a toolkit to see beyond the surface thanks to my education. I might have merely thought of Malacca as a fun, diverse trip if I weren't familiar with publications by authors like Gazin Swartz, Ashworth, Gabern, Frost, McGibbon, Zank, and Valentina. Rather, I start to perceive it as a system of manufacturing and consuming heritage. Thirdly, this brought up issues for the future. Will Malacca be able to strike a balance between commercial tourism and authenticity? Or will it evolve into a more global brand that is built more for Instagram posters rather than for cultural consciousness? Going back to my guiding questions, how do you see the role of consumption in your day-to-day existence? Well, in Malacca, I discovered that consumption does not only influence my choices in food and experientials, but also my perceptions of history and culture. Next, how does the academic study of consumption helps you understand the role of consumption in your life? It allows me to see how both local heritage customs have molded me as a consumer and as a traveler. I was made aware by my trip to Malacca that heritage as well as tourism is never neutral. We are always consuming it and being influenced by it, whether it's through food, mementos, or even narratives. Additionally, as consumers, we are entitled to have a say in how that legacy is shared, valued, and preserved. Anyway, that's all for today's little time traveled adventuring with me. Thanks for tuning in to Tiffing Through Time, where the past is not just remembered, it's consumed. Until next time, stay curious, besties!